Hey, welcome to the Prophecy Roundtable, where again, we don't have all the answers, but we sure have a lot of fun talking about stuff. And we're going to be talking tonight with Monte Judah from Line and Lamb Ministries. I'm really excited about this. We're going to talk about the Millennium and the Feasts of the Lord. So this is going to be a great time. And if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat. We will do our best to get to those. And we're looking forward to just having a great time. So, Monty, we are so glad that you are here, and Scott, of course, as always. So, welcome. We're really glad to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, tell everybody, how you kind of got started in the Messianic circles. Kind of tell people, a lot of people, probably don't know who you are. I'm sure a lot do. But for those that don't, maybe kind of give them the pitch here and where they can find you.
Okay. Well, actually, as I shared with you earlier, I actually got started with the Messianic movement in the Colorado area. I was down in Colorado Springs. And there's some of the brethren that used to be there, that Eliezer Erbach, that used to be part of Chosen People Ministries, had a big impact on me back in those days. And we helped form the first Messianic congregation there in Colorado Springs called Sha'arit Yisrael. And that was with Ira Brower and Bill Berg. Ira is still operating down in Florida. He's a Messianic leader down there. And Bill Berg came up into the Denver area and joined up with Roa Israel. He's gone on to be with the Lord already. But I took off in my aerospace career, went to California and then Norman. And when I got to Norman, Oklahoma, I helped form some congregations here, and then went full time in 1996. I'm not sure I remember exactly which year, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I stepped away from my aerospace career and went full time in the ministry. And as I always share everybody, I started the ministry with a wife, 2 small kids, and 1 computer, and just started teaching the Torah. And I've always had an interest in eschatology. And so the ministry has taken off from there. Line and Lamb's been operating for 27 years now.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you're really one of the earlier pioneers in the, Torah Hebrew roots movement, and that's pretty awesome. So it's really great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah. So our topic tonight, the Millennium and the Feast of the Lord. Now, a lot of our fellow Christian brothers might think, there's no correlation whatsoever, but we might say, we think there's actually some pretty cool correlations. In fact, we have a specific reference to keeping the feast in Zechariah 14.
Yes.
We have another reference in Isaiah 66, from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh will come to worship before the Lord. Right? So we have a very strong implication that all of the feasts will be celebrated based on those 2 passages. And
can I add to that?
Please, absolutely.
Well,
yes.
I think the Messiah made reference to a future Passover when he talked about the last cup, the cup of praise.
Okay.
That he wouldn't drink it with him until we are in the kingdom again.
Uh-huh.
So I think he's intending to enjoy a Passover Seder with us in the future kingdom.
And plus, speaking of Passover, it's coming up next week.
If you look at the language of Shavuot and the Feast of Weeks,
right?
It's called the Day of Proclamation. If you go through Daniel 9, verse 24, there is a 7-step proclamation that sounds like a beautiful proclamation for the Messiah to make the first year in the kingdom. So I see several correlations like you to expect the Feast of the Lord to be in the kingdom, in the millennial kingdom, with the Messiah at that time.
Hey, let me ask you your opinion on this. I'm going to call you Mr. Monty, if that's okay.
Go right ahead.
Down here in Alabama,
I understand.
So, Mr. Monty, one of the things, and Doug knows this is sort of a passion of mine, is the 7th day of creation when God rested, being representative of a Sabbath day. In other words, it was a prophetic picture with the end being declared in the beginning. Do you see a correlation there with the 7 days of creation, him resting on the seventh day? And then we've got this 1,000-year period just happens to be mentioned 6 times over in Revelation.
I teach that every year.
Okay.
In fact, I encourage people to observe the Sabbath because that's the day that we not only cease from our labors, but we invite the Lord to our homes. And I always tell everybody, if you want to be invited to his house in the Millennium Kingdom, maybe you should invite him to your house on a weekly Sabbath, because the correlation between the weekly Sabbath and that future last day of the kingdom, the 1,000-year kingdom, I see a direct correlation to it.
Yeah, the rest that we are striving to enter, if you will.
Right.
And Israel, obviously, in the wilderness, did not enter that rest for lack of obedience. And so and I listened to Elisa Elwine. I'm actually in her class. You're probably familiar. You might be familiar with her, but that's her thing. Is this is like a practice, a dress rehearsal, if you will, a convocation in which we're rehearsing for that future Sabbath day, which just so happens to be 1,000 years.
Couldn't agree more.
So,
hey, let's go back really quick. I think a lot of people are not up on what the feasts are. All right, and then maybe we'll kind of define the millennium as well, right? So these may be terms that are new to some people. Monty, can you kind of run us through what are the feasts and why should believers keep them?
Well, they're laid out in Leviticus 23. And so we refer to them as the commanded feasts. It begins with the month of Nisan in the spring. And we have Passover. Then we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We have the Feast of First Fruits, which occurs in that same time frame. We count the Omer to the Feast of Weeks. We have the 2 dry months, as we say. And we come to the fall feast with Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and then finally Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, and it has a variety of names like Feast of Ingathering, Feast of Booths. Those are the basic commanded feasts of the Lord. When we talk, there's 7 of them that we have there. There's some other holidays that are in the year, like Purim and Hanukkah and other fasts. But Leviticus 23, when we talk about the feast of the Lord, we're really talking about Passover to Tabernacles, that spring to fall time frame.
And Mr. Monty, do you include, I mean, most people do, it's sort of like Passover, and from reading the Gospels, it's like Passover, unleavened bread sort of got merged together. I think that's happened too with Tabernacles, and you got that 8th last day.
Yes.
Feast, that Sabbath. Rarely do people mention it, but it's because it's connected in with Tabernacles. But I find it interesting that at the beginning of the year and the Moedim, the feast, the appointed times, you actually have a 7-day festival there, but it's sort of an 8th day when you count Passover preparation day. And on the back end of it, though, you have Tabernacles and a 7-day feast of Tabernacles, followed by a high Sabbath, if you will, or a Moedim of resting in the 8th day.
Right.
I'm interested in your thoughts on the number 8. What that might represent, 8th day circumcision and all the, 8 people in the ark. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, from a theme standpoint, the number 8 to me is always about new beginnings. Something new is happening at that point that is transformed from what has been in the past. 8th day of the week is essentially the first day of the next week. When you look at the combination of Passover, which is 1 day, and then 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, they're separated. A little controversy on that, though, because Judaism just melds it all together. And whereas if you read Leviticus 23, Passover is definitely on the 14th of Nisan. Unleavened bread doesn't begin until the 15th through the 21st. And by the way, historically, that's one of the differences between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees melded it all together, and whereas the Sadducees were very distinct about that. And then when you go off to Tabernacles, you're right. The 8th day of Tabernacles is the great day of the feast. And you probably have heard the term Shemini Atzeret, which is the 8th day. And it's the great day of the feast. That's when the water libation ceremony was done in the temple, which is a major description given to us in John chapter 7 that the Messiah specifically used as a backdrop to make some very dramatic statements to all of Israel at that time. And I kind of take it straight up as to what Moses had said and try to do that directly. I'm aware of some of these other traditional ways that Judaism in particular has taught. And so they kind of, juggle back and forth. And a lot of folks, when they first come into the movement, especially believers of the Messiah come in, they have a tendency to kind of look at what Judaism does. And it comes as a little bit of a surprise when they actually get into what Moses said, that there's a little bit of a difference there. And I always tell them this is what the Messiah was talking about when he said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And they added a few things there to what Moses had said. And so in observance for us today, we have to make some judgment calls. Are we going to be real distinct about what the Messiah did and what Moses spoke of? Or are we going to kind of go with the tradition and the culture that we have with others that are keeping the feasts?
This is a good year example, like Judaism and many Messianic Judaism congregations, if you will, are still doing first fruits on the 16th. As opposed,
that one I take a little bit of issue with.
Yeah, I do too. That's what I'm saying.
Same here. Yeah.
The other dates are definitive in the calendar. The 14th is Passover. 15th is unleavened bread. But Moses did not give the Feast of First Fruits a definitive date. And instead, the language is the day after the Sabbath, after the Passover.
Right.
And now, of course, Judaism wants to say, well, the high Sabbath on the 15th, then it's got to be on the 16th. That's what they do. And how they count 7 Sabbaths after that doesn't quite make sense to me.
It makes no sense.
Count the 50 days.
I agree.
But to me, first fruits should fall on the first day, which would be a Sunday, after the first weekly Sabbath after the Passover. And so you count 7 consecutive weeks, 7 consecutive Sabbaths. And on the morrow of the 7th Sabbath, well, you have the 50th day, and you have the counting of weeks.
I like to jokingly say that our Christian brothers and sisters get it right twice a year by default. They're gathering and assembling every first fruits and Pentecost or Shavuot, even if they don't realize that's what they're doing.
Which is funny because I've had people come, like we're celebrating, we go to a park often. They're like, well, why are you guys celebrating on Easter? And I'm like, well, we call it first fruits, but these happen to coincide. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And if some things in Christianity are great, I'm happy about that. We don't have to
in my generation, I've watched Christians shift from Easter to calling it Resurrection Sunday. They are kind of backing off that term Easter, but they'll go with the Resurrection Sunday, and so I guess there's a little softening there of the differences.
Hey, question: I know. Do you believe that Yeshua? I'll go and tell you what I believe. I believe he was crucified on the 4th day of the week, the midst of the week. This year actually would mirror, if you will, what happened almost 2,000 years ago, and that he rose on the weekly Sabbath. And what he actually fulfilled was when he ascended to the Father on first fruits, not the resurrection. What is your understanding, opinion? Tell me why I'm wrong or why I'm right, I guess.
All right, this is going to be an interesting answer for you. Let me tell you a little history. I've taught extensively the New Testament as well as the Torah and so forth. Many years ago, I wrote an article called The Passion of the Passover. And the Passion, of course, laying out each day what happened. When did he enter Jerusalem? When exactly did he do the Passover? What day of the week was it? When was he buried? I laid the whole thing out. Of all of the articles I have ever written in my ministry, and I write them monthly, this one, I got more flack on this thing than I have ever on any other topic I've done. including eschatology, two-house teaching, all of them. They were like all bundled up. I had more people coming at me to take issue with, was it Wednesday? Was it Thursday? What time of the day was it? And that, tell you the truth, I've kind of just taken a step back and I just let them all rumble amongst themselves. And basically I hone it down into, look, I believe that he succeeded in coming into Jerusalem and was presented like the lamb. The Passover lamb has to be examined, and he's brought into the house, and that he was sacrificed, and that he was resurrected, and that all of the prophecies were fulfilled in the course of that. As to the exact day, whether it be Wednesday, Thursday, and the counting of the 3 days and 3 nights, when I attempted to cover this, I tried to explain how we Hebrews count days.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the turning of the day is at sundown.
Correct.
So if you're, say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's one day, you know, with the Hebrew, you start with 1. And then if you go into the evening, well, that's day 2. And I tried to show how that kind of counting system does exist amongst the Hebrew people. Even that didn't help me a bit for people trying to be understanding of this situation.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've only been doing this with Doug about 2 years now, and I've gotten a lot more humble because you know, when you're sitting behind the keyboard or you're sitting, you know, you can lob all the grenades you want to, but when you start doing this and actually stating it publicly where it's up, you get, I think I've gotten a little more humble. Maybe Doug would disagree, but you start to hedge a little bit, or you can have a strong opinion, but say, you know what, I may not be correct. As a matter of fact, I know I'm not correct on all my understandings. So no doubt.
Well, you're right, Scott. We're all learning, and I think it's appropriate for us to continue to remain humble.
Yes.
While we're growing in wisdom.
Yep.
And if we're not humble, that's a pretty good check that maybe we're not gaining the wisdom God wants us to have.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can proceed seriously to spiritual maturity without a big dose of humility.
Because it's not about knowledge, right? I mean, a lot of people, I think, a lot of people that come into this Torah Hebrew roots thing think that it's about knowledge, but it's not. You know, I tell them, I'm like, who do you think out of all of God's creatures, who has the most knowledge? Satan. Okay. You know, and he's not doing so well in God's kingdom, last I checked. So it's not about having more knowledge than people. It's about having a heart that is tender toward the Lord. And even if I'm doing something that's wrong, you know, God will correct me in time, but I want to be humble, right? I mean, Micah 6:8, right? Walk humbly with the Lord, right? I mean, it's right there. And I'll tell you, I've also tried to reconcile, you know, exactly which day Jesus was crucified on. And I just say Wednesday or Thursday, you know, and I'm just, you know, I could see Wednesday, I could see Thursday. I don't think it was Friday at all, but you know, Wednesday or Thursday, I'm okay with either of those. And it did all work out, you know. And exactly when did he resurrect? Well, I'm guessing probably Saturday evening. I don't see why he would stay in the tomb any longer than he had to, but then again, you know, who knows, right? So
well, the first evidence we have of the resurrection is there at the dawn of the day when the women come to it. That's the first real evidence we have of the resurrection when it took place. When exactly did he come out of the grave? Well, it's obviously before the women came. But you know, beyond that, that's really the only hard evidence that we have to substantiate any theory.
Hey, Mr. Monte, would you think though that what he actually fulfilled was when he ascended to the Father? And obviously, he has to resurrect first to ascend to the Father as the first fruits from the dead. But that's what he's actually fulfilling. And I believe along with him, he took those other resurrected saints that were Matthew records they're walking around. In other words, he was the first fruits, but he also presented I guess what you would say, the sheaf of the barley, like the first fruits of the harvest, that barley harvest at that time.
Well, and in fact, that is exactly what happens in the temple ceremony at the Feast of First Fruits. When the resurrection was taking place and they were coming to terms with he's not in the tomb, well, those priests were in there in the temple waving those green barley sheaves, thanking God for the resurrection of life. I can't think of a more thematic, correct temple procedure to be going on in the worship of God while the Messiah is dealing with the first day of his resurrection.
Well, and I think it's also, he told Mary, don't touch me yet. He had not yet ascended.
Now you're absolutely right. That is a very interesting point, because later on in the day, he apparently does come into contact with others, and there is some direct contact. I tend to favor that he did show up with the disciples later that first day, asking Thomas to go ahead and touch him, which is the exact opposite of saying to the women, don't touch me. So he has to have ascended to the Father, done whatever it is that he had to do, and then he was back to deal with the witness of his resurrection.
Yeah.
It's
So, okay, we've talked about the feast, which is awesome. Now let's put it in the context. Well, we're not done. We're not done. Well, let's put it in the context, just so that we have truth in advertising here. In the context of the millennium. Okay. So again, for those of us for those people that have maybe never heard of this is what the Bible talks about. As you said, 6 times in the book of Revelation, it talks about 1,000-year period, Revelation chapter 20, where Satan's put away and it's good times. Yay. People are building houses. And then after the 1,000 years, Satan is let out. Right. So this is what we call the millennium, the 1,000 years, the seventh day, lots of different names for it, but we're all talking about the same thing. Right. So why would there be feasts now that we've gotten a sense of these feasts? Why do you think there would be? I mean, are there, first of all? Secondly, why would there be? And I'd love for you to elaborate more on Daniel chapter 9, if you'd like to, on that topic.
Well, let's talk about the logical. Why would we do that? I mean, why would we, as soon as the Messiah returns to Jerusalem, why would we observe the Feast of Tabernacles like Zechariah 14 says we're going to do? If you get into tabernacles, you start observing it. One of the things that you learn is we call that the double commandment to rejoice before the Lord. Tabernacles, specifically when it was given to us, Leviticus 23, on 2 occasions, Moses told us, you shall rejoice before the Lord. Well, let's just think about the logic here for a moment. You and I make it out of this present age. We make it into the Messianic kingdom. The Messiah has returned. I'll tell you what I'm going to be doing right off the bat, rejoicing. And to have a holiday that specifically is dedicated to that, I can't think of anything more appropriate to do right off the bat in the kingdom with the Messiah, is to rejoice before the Lord. But the other holidays, to me, they tell the great story of the Messiah, of the redemption of us, God's great plan, taking a bride. And in fact, I view the holidays, the Leviticus 23 holidays, these are the gifts for the bride given before the marriage of the Lamb. And these are gifts that have been given to us. Just like if you were going to get engaged, you'd probably give an engagement ring to a young lady. And you might give other gifts associated even before you're married. In fact, I even refer to Sabbath as our engagement ring, that it's a gift that's been given to mankind to give you a taste of what it will be like in the kingdom with him. The holidays follow suit throughout the year, and I see each one having its own character for it. If you go through those holidays and look at the individual character for each one, they all illustrate part of us coming to know God, and particularly the Messiah. They all speak to the Messiah and the things he's done or is going to do for us. So me, in the kingdom, I like the idea that we would go through the annual cycle, rejoicing before the Lord, enjoying all these different feasts with the Lord, the pilgrimage feast. Let's go to Jerusalem. Let's see the Lord, each throughout the year of the kingdom. So tying back to what was the other point you wanted to make here? The other question you had?
Yeah, well, so, why would we do these? And maybe kind of what will they look like? And I even want to throw one more in. Do you think they will extend for all eternity? That's a bit of
That's a very
speculation,
good
but
question, that part. Let me go ahead and just say this first. Do you like barbecue? Do you like barbecue by chance?
I live in Alabama, so that's an easy one.
well, yeah,
Okay.
I've
Well,
loved
you see,
barbecue.
that's the
Yeah,
feast. The feasts are big barbecues.
right. That's right.
The burning fat up there on the altar. I'm all for barbecue.
Yeah.
And having a barbecue with the Lord is a great idea as far as I'm concerned.
Just as long as we don't have Yeshua as the eternal high priest barbecuer feeding meals to the Father.
This is an inside joke from a debate that we did with some guys.
All right. Well, what I was going to add was
Please.
the Messiah's already demonstrated the ability to feed thousands. So I think he's not going to have a problem feeding us at this feast that we will be having with the Lord. That to me is a joyous thing, and something to really have fellowship with the Lord and with the other brethren at the same time. Now, your question, Doug, about what happens after the end of the 1,000 years, this is the way I describe this to people. I say, look, God's only given me enough information to understand this 1 week. What he's got planned after this week, I'm not sure about yet. Well, we may have to wait and see what he has to say about that.
He really doesn't give us much information about eternity. We don't.
No,
I mean,
the one thing he does do for us, though, while that might be a short answer, the one thing he does do for us, he tells us that he somehow knew us before the foundations of the world. And he somehow talks about eternity as something that will go even beyond what we understand. So I'm not concerned about, what's going to be happening at those other times. I'm enjoying the week I'm having with the Lord and the time I'm having, and looking forward to getting into the kingdom and having this other mess that we call the world go by the wayside. But it's like, I'm waiting to hear what the Lord has to plan next week after this one.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Yeah. Well, obviously it's speculation as to what's going to happen in eternity. My speculation is that what begins in the millennium will continue, except for rebellion at the very end. But I think that, the good times that get started during the millennium will simply continue. And I imagine us flying out in space and getting to see all of God's creation and all that. But that's neither here nor there. So 3 times a year during the millennium, we're imagining people coming back. Let's back up for a second, because one of the ways that I really got into Hebrew roots, Torah, Messianic stuff was through the fall feasts. And it blew my mind when I began to understand how the fall feasts have to be, in my opinion, fulfilled in like manner to the spring feasts, right? So I don't know if you want to touch on that, because I think it's such a fun point. And sometimes for people that are just coming into this, they're like, wait a second, am I missing something like that? Well, for me, it was like, wait, this is way too cool. Why did I never hear about this?
Well, you've hit on, I think, a very common experience for many Messianics that come in. One of the first things that hits them is when they do the Passover and they suddenly realize, oh, this is the thing the Messiah did with his disciples. Oh my gosh, there's so much prophecy in this. The betrayal is shown in it. The death and burial, resurrection is shown in it. The breaking the bread, the special bread, the cup, what is common for Christian communion, which is very meaningful in the Passover. And then he gets resurrected on the Feast of First Fruits. He was without sin. There's deliverance. We eat the bread of haste. We're all delivered. at that time because of the work of redemption. And as it continues on, and we see the spring feast as the Messiah really purposely came into Jerusalem at that festival to do that. It was then that he revealed himself to be the Messiah. Prior to that, he kept saying, his time is not yet, my time is not yet. But when he came to the Passover, all of a sudden, that's the right time. So we see this very direct fulfillment of the spring feast by his coming to us and doing the work of redemption. It follows then that his second coming, I think, is going to be very direct, tied together with the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and with tabernacles. Now, if we follow Zechariah and 14, then that tabernacle celebration is the first celebration after he's returned. Yom Kippur seems to speak to the day of the Lord, the day of reconciliation that God has with the whole world. And then trumpets, of course, speaks to the resurrection and what we understand to be the rapture. So that sequence of events, I think, is pretty much out there right in front of us.
Mr. Monty, great minds think alike. I mean, me and Doug agree with you 100% is what we're saying.
So what I say to a lot of folks coming in the Messianic movement, I've seen and talked to a lot of them. They're stunned at how direct and specific the things we understand about the Messiah, what actually happened in the Passover. And it follows, for those that are anticipating the coming of the Lord, boy, this lays out the eschatology scenario for the second coming beautifully with the fall feast. And of course, if you're a post-trib kind of guy like me, well, then I see that happening in fulfillment of those fall feasts. So let's go to Daniel 9, okay, where they lay out the 70 weeks of Israel and they try to get the 7-year combination. I always remind everybody that when the Bible talks about the Great Trib, it's talking about 3.5 years. It's not talking about 7 years. It's talking about 3.5 years.
Amen.
That's a logical theory that's been put forward. And to tell you the truth, when I have discussed Daniel 9 and the whole 70 weeks things with a lot of other brethren, one of the things I point out to them is that when you start off with Daniel 9:24, the word weeks happens to be a biblical holiday. Now, the word that's actually used in verse 24, and you help me with this, Doug, is the word Shevarim. It's the male gender. Shavuot is the female gender. That's what we normally call the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot. But when it's Shevarim, as my understanding, and it's limited on my Hebrew, that means the plural of Shavuot. Shavuot is a once a year thing. So I see that whole business of starting with Daniel 9:24 as really a description of 70 Feast of Weeks. And I find in our generation an incredible corollary of real events that have happened in this generation. If you take the understanding, we're talking about Shavuots, a number of Feast of Weeks that occur in the last generation. If I could illustrate one point that really strikes me pretty strong on
So
this.
just to be clear, you're saying that the Shavuim weeks, or heptads, as some people might argue,
Right,
is more about a series of the 7 weeks of like the Pentecost time or the Shavuot
it's
time?
70 Pentecosts. That take that for a moment. Now let me hit you with the thing that really gets me on this. And if you follow that prophecy down a little bit further, it talks about after 62 weeks and then 7 weeks. It's got this subdivision in there, and it talks about Jerusalem being rebuilt with plaza and moat. You remember that part?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You know when Jerusalem got a plaza and a moat in this generation? Historical Jerusalem has never had a plaza and a moat. But today, you go to the Western Wall, the Kotel, that is the plaza. If you go just to the south, down to the Jerusalem Archaeological Port, they call that the moat, the big dig. They dug down the wall and built that. And today they call it the plaza and the moat over there. And I find that modern language, which has only shown up recently, very compelling in an attempt to try to understand this passage in Daniel 9:24 through 27. And I've never heard anyone before advocating the 490-year scenario. How do you explain the 62 and 7? How do you explain Jerusalem rebuilt with plaza and moat? They've never satisfactorily explained that to me. But those things stand out today with me with great interest as to how that language works. The whole point being, I think those are some of the clues that prove we're the last generation. And I think
Mr. Monty, when was that plaza moat built? Around 2000?
I think about 20 years ago.
Okay. That's interesting.
Now, I'll tell you my own personal experience on this. Let me tell you where I got that from. I was leading a tour over to Israel, and I took them to the Kotel one evening. And a group of them went through the rabbi's tunnel thing, and I was waiting for them out there in the plaza and just kind of praying and doing my own thing while I was waiting for the group to come back. Well, they started coming back to me, and they're all looking around. And I had been praying very intently, Lord, help me to understand this Daniel 9 passage. I just don't have a great confidence about how to understand that. I really need some help on that. And one of the group came up to me and they said, well, Monty, what is this place? And I said, oh, well, this is the plaza here, and down there is the moat. The words came out of my mouth, and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I never heard the words like that. And literally, it came out of my mouth after I'd asked the Lord for better understanding. And I went back, did a little digging. And sure enough, this is a modern thing that has happened in this generation. There's no history of Jerusalem having a plaza and a moat. There was a cardo. There's been, the walls and the upper city and lower city, but they don't refer to it in that language anywhere.
Hey,
That's
Monty,
a
can you
modern-day term we use?
What verse are you looking at there? Because I'm looking, is it a 25 or which one for the moat that you are?
Let's see. Read down that a little bit further. And after 62 weeks, there you go.
Okay.
Should it be the language that they're using? The street shall be built again, and the well.
Back up to 25. Back up to 25 and 24.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. 25. Know therefore that from the going forth is the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay. Mm-hmm. That language there, what version have you got?
So that's the New King James.
Yeah. If you look at the other languages, it says, Jerusalem shall be built with plaza and moat.
Okay.
Is in the other versions.
Some say streets and strong defenses.
Yeah,
here we go. So
how you translate
this is the complete Jewish open spaces and moats. So that's what you're talking about there.
Yeah, open space is the plaza. The moat is the dig down along the wall.
Okay.
I think New American Standard uses that exact language that I'm using.
Okay. So again, tell me where, I used to live in Israel for 3 years. So I'm trying to imagine, where is the moat? I know where the Kotel is. I know there's a huge open space there.
To the south of Kotel, they have dug down and removed the stones that have been tipped off the mount.
Yep.
And
where you can see
there.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a lot of question about, have they weakened the foundation, or are the Jews in there digging, and so that the whole Temple Mount and the mosque falls? They had a big investigation about that. There was a lot of controversy about that. They brought in these Turkish archaeologists to investigate and certify that everything was safe and secure. And at that time, they were referring to it as the moat. It is the definition of moat is you dig down the wall. And they were using that wording and language. And whenever I go over there, I say the moat. And everybody I run into, they know exactly what I'm talking about. They talk about that Jerusalem Archaeological Park they've done on the south wall. Under Robinson's Arch, down that way, and on around to the corner of the southern steps.
Okay, I know exactly where you're talking about. And yeah, I mean, I've never heard it referred to as a moat, but like there's no water there to keep, with alligators in or anything like that. But there is definitely a depression, and I could see that. I mean, that's
Well, that's the language that I'm familiar with when I've been over there. They used that as the language for all of the work that was done there. The removal of those big giant stones, the Romans knocked off.
Right.
Getting down to the streets of the Second Temple period, the sacrifice shops, that whole complex, that archaeological work where they went down the wall, they referred to it as the moat.
I'm just sitting here. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I'm just looking at this word. Doug, you help me out. Karutz. Is that karutz? Harris. Anyway.
Which
the word translated as moat one time, or as streets in Daniel 9:27. Other times it's translated as sharp, diligent, gold, diligence, diligent. Gold. So it's obviously trench. A word that has many meanings.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's also can be a decision, but trench, moat, ditch. I think I think that's a very fair translation. Trench, moat, or ditch.
Yeah. In this context, it would be a trench, moat, or ditch. It's not going to be sharp pointed, sharp, or diligent.
Probably not. Probably not. Yeah.
Not going to be gold.
Yeah. Well, Monty, thank you. I just learned something that is really cool.
Well,
so that's one of your reasons why we must be in the last days, or probably, right? Because this is all pretty new.
Well, there's a lot of end time prophecy that has already been fulfilled. If you just start with the state of Israel, and all of that has come from that, the enemies to the north, all of the issues that have been happening, the attention being given to the Temple Mount these days, the desire on the part of the Jews to partition the Temple Mount and build an altar again, all of those are bubbling issues in Israel. And those are all some of the prerequisites that takes us right to the end of the age. And the start of the Great Tribulation, being the abomination of desolation, the shutting down of the altar. Well, you got to have an altar operating before you can shut it down. So,
have you, let me on that topic, and this is something that this is my understanding right now. Obviously, I grew up in dispensationalism, Mr. Monty, and had to kind of unlearn it. But everybody talks about the abomination of desolation. This is, about a temple or a rebuilt temple or a tabernacle. But the word Yeshua uses in Matthew 24 specifically says the hagios topos. The place is holy. In other words, there's no naos or temple mentioned. There's no therion or therios. In other words, there's no brick and mortar building. It's the location in which the abomination of desolation occurs.
Right.
I'm at the current understanding that location is holy, even with an ongoing abomination that's been on it now ever since that the Dome of the Rock was been built, because it had. Wow. But obviously nobody has stood there yet, declared to be God, and started to perform miracles and false signs and wonders. It has not been fulfilled yet. But so that's I don't preclude a temple being built. I don't preclude Judah restarting their sacrifices. But when I actually just look at Matthew 24 and Mark 13, it's not required to actually fulfill what Yeshua said must be fulfilled. In other words, it's going to stand in the holy place, the holy location, the topographical location. Have you ever looked into that?
Yeah. In fact, I always tell most of my audiences Now, most of you had that nice lady in Sunday school that came in with a flannel graph and explained the tabernacle to you. And they explained how that first chamber in the temple was called the holy place, and then the inner one was called the Holy of Holies. But when Jerusalem and the temple was built there, the entire Temple Mount was now called the holy place. So when the prophecy speaks of in Thessalonians about him taking his seat in the holy place, he could be anywhere on the Temple Mount and satisfy that language. The thing that is, to me, required, now that's really focusing down, the abomination of desolation, if you're going to have a cessation of the daily sacrifice, minimally you have to have the court of Israel measured out, and you have to have an altar built. That does not necessarily mean that you have to have a temple sanctuary built, with a porch and the two chambers. The prophecy only requires the altar and that court to be measured. And that's Revelation 11. That language is repeated there. So to me, what I'm anticipating is that somehow the Jews will get a piece of the Temple Mount, they'll partition it. Most of it will be left outside to the Gentiles. The inner part will be set for them. They'll set the cornerstone, they'll measure the court, they'll rebuild the altar. And once they rebuild the altar, that's when they start the daily sacrifice. And if you look historically how the temple's been built in the past, the altar was always set up first and operated while the building of the sanctuary was done.
That's a great
point. Whenever anytime I hear some Christian teachers saying, "Oh, the temple's got to be rebuilt," no, that is not correct. The altar has to be operating. They're moving toward a temple, but it's not required to satisfy the prophecies that we've been given. All you have to do is have that altar operating, and with the daily sacrifice, have it shut down, and an image set up on what is called the wing of abomination. On the temple, the wing is to the north or to the south of the altar. So all you have to do is use any of that other open ground up there, and you will have satisfied that language. And if he sets up on the Temple Mount, he went to the holy place, for the language. That language all changed, when Jerusalem and the temple got built, But I keep telling everybody they're all relying on that nice lady that came in with a flannel graph, and that's what they're using as a reference.
Well, and I like to say this. Me and Doug actually differ a little bit here, but on that final future 7 years, where everybody's looking for the Antichrist to make a false peace treaty or covenant, the Jesuits are masters at what they do, and so everybody's looking for some covenant that the Jews are going to make with an Antichrist to kick off this final 7 years. And I no longer, I am 100% by golly dogmatic, because I've got a second and a third witness in Revelation that there is no doubt by golly a 42-month, 1,260-day, 3.5-year time period. I just don't see a first witness necessarily that it wasn't Yeshua that confirmed and strengthened the covenant with the many. What's your understanding on Daniel 27?
You can disagree with Scott. It's okay.
Yeah, you will not hurt my feelings.
Because
I'm not hard over about it. To me, when it says in the middle of the week, okay, when it says the middle of the week there, that just means 3.5. That's all that means. But they keep expanding into a 7-year period. That's a theory. That's a kind of a preliminary conclusion based on a theory
that Ribera made up. The Jesuit Ribera.
If you're looking for something that would mean a distinct number, just say the word the middle of the week. It means 3.5. By the way, in the book of Daniel, that 3.5 thing, it gets repeated multiple times. A time, times, and half a time. That's talked about multiple times. Right. And of course, all the other dimensions that you talked about, the day dimensions, whether it be 1290, 1335, 1260, 42 months, you're talking 3.5 years. That's all within the envelope of that time period. Nothing ever says 7 years.
And do you believe that where Yeshua in Matthew 24, he's referring to the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet? I believe he's referring to Daniel 12 there, and not necessarily. He could be referring to both Daniel 12 and Daniel 9:27, but I think it's a no-brainer he's referring to Daniel 12.
Well, it's for sure Daniel 12. No question about that, because the two elements of the abomination prophecy are specifically specified. If you go back earlier into that, you have to consider the other language from chapter 9 and the other ways that it explains it. If you go to Ezekiel 8 and it talks about a series of abominations, you get down to that final abomination that's in chapter 8, and immediately chapter 9 starts talking about Gabriel going out and sealing the foreheads of the remnant of Israel.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And so I think that passage ties in to part of the definition of the abomination. We keep giving Daniel all the credit for that, but I find Ezekiel talking about that too.
Well, I see there's a lot in Ezekiel. I would like to get Mr. Judah's opinion on this too, as far as the 3.5 days of testimony of the two witnesses. I personally, real quick, I'll lay the groundwork. I believe that is an example of a day for a year from Ezekiel, where he's told to lie on one side for 40 days and 40 that represents 40 years. I see no say, and I've asked many people, where else do you ever see in a 3.5 day period in the entire scripture? And I don't see it.
Scott, as long as you're going to open this whole thing up, let's go ahead and get the rest of the Bible involved.
Mr. Judah, I've got to find something that we differ about. We don't ever have anybody on that I like sit here and amen everything.
Well, you know what? I have been at this particular subject for more than the time I've been at Lion of Lamb Ministries. I publish a document called the Tribulation Timeline, which I wrote many years ago. I have never modified. It still holds true. And all it is I don't know when it happens, but it's all the prophecies about the last 3.5 years. And they all lay out, and they're very symmetrical. And let me just add this one thing to that. You've got to come up with, if you're going to deal with this whole subject, you've got to come up with a prophetic scenario that can be bore out with all these other prophecies about how do you handle the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 plagues. And most people use that telescopic method. The tubes come out of the tube for that. I have a completely different scheme to that. I see it as highly integrated. I see it as a prophetic scenario. If I was to take you to a music hall where an orchestra was going to play, and I wanted to tell you in advance of the musicians what was going to happen, I'd walk you into the section where the violins are at. And then I'd take you to where the drums are going to play, and I'd take you where the choir is going to stand and where the trumpets are at. Now, you would understand that just because I showed it to you that way, that isn't necessarily the way it's going to play. You would know that when the music gets going, why some multiple instruments might be playing at the same time, and some might be doing a solo. But at the end, maybe everybody's playing and singing at the end, and it's like the climax,
the grand finale.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
I see the book of Revelation. I see it as a drama. I see it as a prophetic symphony that integrates all these other prophecies from the other prophets of Israel together in it.
Love it.
I
totally agree. I think the book of Revelation is laid out thematically. That's what I call it.
Yes.
It's the same idea as you're explaining with the symphony. They're all, there may be different voices in this thing, but it's all one symphony that's played together. And
to sort it out, you have to pay attention to what the angels say. The angels actually give you the clues as to how everything kind of fits and interrelates to it. I had a seminar once with an Orthodox rabbi, and the subject was what he thought of the book of Revelation. And he referred to it as a stolen book. And I said, now, how so? And he said, well, there's nothing new in there. It's all the different things that came from the prophets of Israel. And at that moment, I suddenly said, whoa, he's right. This all book of Revelation is like Grand Central Station for all these trains coming in and out, all these trains of prophecy. And that gave me a whole nother perspective about how to pull together, because if you're going to try to understand Daniel 9, you got to take the book of Revelation together. And if you're going to get those two together, you got to deal with all the other prophets who come up with the symbology and the language that's used in the end time prophetic scenario.
Right.
Let me ask you something from Numbers about, and this is where, and I learned about most of the stuff that I think I understand now. I learned from somebody else. This was from Halisa Elwine about the 144,000. When there's 1,000 from each tribe chosen to go to battle and go to war, all 12,000 come back alive. And so
Correct.
She drew the connection that these are going to be like, and I did give them this name, through the storm troopers, if you will, like the perhaps the special forces or whatever. But in other words, supernaturally sealed, and to the extent that they're not going to die, just like those. And she drew the correlation with 1,000 from each tribe in that battle. You just didn't go to battle in that day and age and not die unless there was supernatural protection and intervention on your behalf. But that would just be.
I'll go ahead and beat my own drum. She got that from me.
Uh-oh. I'll have to talk to her.
Listen, all that stuff you've been hearing, I'm the guy that put that out 30 years ago.
Okay. Well, she had a good teacher then, but God, I love to, she says it's sweeter than you, though.
Oh, I know.
And me.
No, I see I see the entire Exodus out of Egypt as a prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
And there are elements, I go specifically to Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, where he said, now those things that happen in the wilderness are for our admonition and instruction, upon whom will fall at the end of the ages. If you go back and look at what happened in the wilderness, all the different tests, all the different things that happened, you can see them coming forward. Well, the last one was the battle with the Midianite kings, 1,000 from each tribe. And they went off to battle. You know that not one soldier was missing when they came back. Everyone was counted for the booty at the end of that battle. And I see the 144,000, once they get sealed, they do not die. They come back. They are at the end when the Messiah returns. They're the welcoming committee for the Messiah.
Genesis. So basically Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, Judges, First, the historical books for all the way through are essentially are what we should be looking to understand prophecy. What was, is, and will be the cyclical, the cyclical pattern of prophecy.
The part of the way I say it is that history is actually prophecy, and prophecy is history that hasn't happened yet. So there is a direct correlation.
Just to clarify on the 144,000, you see them as crossing over, like they never die, like they get sealed and then they don't die.
That's correct. And they serve.
That's awesome. I totally agree with you. I'm with you.
To help protect the tribulation saints.
I'm tracking
during the days of the Great Tribulation.
Love it. Ooh,
so
little quick commercial here. So I just came out with my book. I'm really, really excited about it. And I want to, of course, encourage people to get that. And I thought I had where'd it go? That's annoying. Anyway, I had a picture, but it's gone. But I put the link in the description. It's called Regenesis Code, and it is a novel about the end times. I call it the Book of Revelation meets the Matrix or Marvel Cinematic Universe or something like that. And
Barry Jenkins, your uncle.
I wish. But so I definitely take a different slant than Left Behind, obviously.
Right.
But in book 2, which I'm still writing, the 144,000 are going to be, kind of these superhero good guys. They're going to stand up against the super bad guys, right? Which I think are, the people that take the mark of the beast are the ones that get these superheroes, and the super villains, right? They get the super bad powers. And so I think that'll sort of be a foil to all the bad stuff that Satan's doing. So I'm just delighted to hear that we see it essentially the same way. That's pretty cool.
And I think Doug, I agree with you. I want to ask Mr. Judah about this. As far as that man-child, Mr. Monte, as far as that man-child that in Revelation 12, and this is something we had Tony Robinson on a few weeks ago, and I talked to Tony again today about doing a follow-up, where I will use the term rapture. I don't like the term for 1 Thessalonians 4, but Paul mentions how there was a man, and you think he's being humble, and he actually mentions in those two verses that he was raptured up to paradise, saw things he could not see. Now, if Paul is referring to himself and he was raptured, whether in body or spirit, he did not know. He obviously came back. He was still human because he still died. That's what I see happening, potentially, that the man-child that might also be the 144,000 are actually harpazoed, go into the third heavens, if you will, as Paul did, but then they don't get into their glorified immortal bodies yet, but they're supernaturally sealed. What do you have? What's your understanding on the man-child and the harpazo of the man-child?
I see Revelation 12. The parallel I see with it, the Revelation 12, is almost like an astrological sign. If you look at the heavens declare the glory of God, there's a scenario of Hydra, the dragon near Virgo, the Virgin, and then you have Regulus, the king, bright star that comes forth from Virgo. It almost has the language of what would be an astrological sign to it. That's like about as far as I take that.
Like Heiser had a teaching on that, as far as the time Yeshua was born, that sign occurred. Others teach this, that it was September 11th, 3 BC, which just happened to be a Yom Teruah. Since you're a prophecy, I call us all prophecy geeks, by the way. You were probably familiar with in 2017 when people were predicting the rapture based on the Revelation 12 sign.
Sure. Yeah, we've heard all the different quotes on what was going to be happening, in the past. In fact, I have a book on my library that was given to me when I started my ministry that was entitled "The Lion and the Lamb." My ministry is called that, and it's a commentary on the book of Revelation, written about 150 years ago. And the author is expressing great fear and trepidation trying to do a commentary on Revelation, because in his lifetime, every 10 years, somebody's standing up and predicting the coming of the Lord. And of course, here we are now in 2023, and we've all had that experience of different predictions being done, for it. The one thing that really stands out to me on this whole subject is you got to answer the question first, are we the last generation? If the answer is yes to that, then you should be looking very intently at all the other detailed prophecies. But if you can't answer that with an affirmative yes, then we're no different than others have been in the past. We can academically talk about this, but we can't take it that direct unless we have the evidence to prove we're the last generation. By the way, that's another topic for us to discuss. I will lay out the arguments of why I'm convinced we're the last generation.
Well, maybe we should do that the next
time. My dad wrote a book back in the 70s on the 7x7 plan of God. Now, I argued with him and told him I thought it was the death of the Messiah, not the birth. But he self-published that book. So I've been a firm believer in a 7-day plan, and that it has been about 1.993-ish days, give or take, since Yeshua returned to his place. So I think that's the best evidence that we are that terminal generation. He has not yet been gone 2 days. And I believe 2 Peter in chapter 3, he's all but telling us, hey guys, I'm not slow about my promises. You just got to wait 2 days. And we're almost at the end of that second day, and I like to use ish because perhaps our Roman calendar is off a year or two, plus or minus a year or two. So
just a little bit. I'm sure we're off just a little bit,
Yeah, even 5 and 10 to be safe,
Yeah, exactly.
We should give ourselves a lot of margin of error.
Exactly.
Wow. Man, this has been really fun. We have a couple questions. Mark asks, aren't the feasts of Passover and Tabernacles eternal? What are your thoughts on that, Monty?
I think they are.
Okay.
Just straight up simple question, simple answer. Yes, I do think they are.
Okay.
I think the word of God is eternal, perfect, forever settled in heaven.
Amen. This is from David. He says, have you guys heard about the scheduled slaughter for one of the unblemished heifers next year around Passover in the land?
Yes, I have. Watching it very closely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And then Montana says, what does it mean he went down first? I don't quite know the context of that, but
I think they were talking about Sheol when we were talking about him ascending. And obviously Paul mentions how he descended and then ascended. So I believe he did go down to Sheol and preach the gospel, if you will.
Yeah. And one of the greatest prophecies about the Messiah is he who ascends and descends. And when Moses was going up and down the mountain, he was illustrating what the Messiah would be sent from the mountain and go back up the mountain. And that's a huge prophecy throughout the scripture about the Messiah.
That's really cool.
That's one where Moses is illustrating about the Messiah.
And trick question for Dr. Hamp. How many days did Moses wait at the base, and what day did he go up? He went up on the 7th day, just as Israel waited 2 days to clean their garments prior to Yah coming down on the 3rd day. The symbolism is everywhere, just screaming at us. You've got to willfully do this not to see it.
What am I missing though?
No, you're not missing. I was just asking you. Moses talking about this symbols and this typology as he went up the mountain to what Mr. Monty was saying on the 7th day.
Well, if you remember, this is the question that Yeshua asked Nicodemus. He said, he referred to he who has ascended and descended, and he who's lifted up like Moses' staff. That's the greatest prophecy, the longest prophecy of the Messiah in the Torah, and the shortest prophecy of the Messiah. And he was asking Nicodemus, who knew the law, how is it that you're a ruler of this people and you don't know this? This is some sort of basic understanding that you get out of the Torah that you're supposed to already know about the Messiah. And that ascending, descending thing is pictured by Moses going up and down the mountain.
Wow. That's very cool. Oh, there's so much more we could talk about. I mean, there's just a lot of cool stuff. But Monty, tell people where they can find you on YouTube, because I know you have some fantastic channels. So kind of tell people where they can find them.
YouTube, if you just punch in Monte Judah on YouTube, it'll take you to a whole bunch of things. It'll branch out. We have a Q&A program that we have on there. I have a Saturday morning program where we're going through, right now I'm teaching about the spring feast, and that's an ongoing program. B'nai Shalom is the name of my internet congregation. That's a Friday night broadcast up on YouTube. I'm on so many platforms that my staff has to tell me, to remind me to tell people about them. I think I'm on Roku. I'm on several of them. I can't even repeat the names of all of them. But if you just go to the Lion and Lamb website, you can get directed to them. You go to YouTube, you'll find me on there. Roku, you'll find me on there. I've got a channel on that.
Nice.
And I think there's a couple other platforms that I'm on there. If they go looking for me, they're going to find me.
Nice. Well, I sure hope that we can have you back, because
I'd love it.
I think we just scratched the surface of some really exciting topics.
We did have a couple of people in chat saying that they would love to make you be a permanent guest. So, by the way, this is what we do. We used to have a third co-host, Mr. Monty, and unfortunately, we're all still friends, but he just no longer hangs out with us anymore.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd be happy to contribute, fellas. I'd be happy to contribute however I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I do want to remind people that this amazing book, look at that. Look at that beautiful book, huh?
Wow.
Yeah. That
like
is now available for pre-order on Amazon Kindle. So check it out. Regenesis Code. That has been many, many, many years in the making. And I'm really excited about it. And I really do covet your prayers, guys, because the goal for me is that this would become a movie. Okay. That was my original intent. And then COVID happened and all this weird stuff. And so I wrote a book instead. And I'm going to write 4 books. That's the plan right now, is to write 4 books. I do hope the theology will be a little more sound than Left Behind. That's my personal bias, but I want to really work hard. So I worked hard. I worked with Mornay Theunissen. He's a wonderful gentleman out of South Africa, and so we've been working on this for I didn't want to admit how many years it's been, but it's been a while. So check it out. It's on Amazon. Just put in Regenesis Code, and that should come up, and it'll be coming out July 5th. So your support will really be helpful. I do appreciate that. Monty, thank you so much. This has really been fun. Scott, of course, as always, this is really a great time. And we just want to say thank you to everybody that joined us tonight. And we hope that you have